Okay, it's recording. Okay, cool. So welcome everyone. So last time we started with the introduction to this book by Vladimir Lossky, The Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church. And today we're moving on to the second chapter, which is the divine darkness. So he starts off by mentioning a very important text concerning mystical theology. This was likely written by a disciple of St. Paul, Dionysius the Areopagite. Now, there is some kind of doubts over the author, or whether it was Dionysius or someone else. But I think recently there was new evidence that makes it more likely that he was actually the author. I think there was discoveries made in 2024, but I haven't looked deeply into that. But more important than the identity of the author is, of course, the value of the text itself, right? And the church's judgment on the contents of the work. So, as we know in the church, the Holy Spirit guides the church, right, to protect the faith. So we follow the church's judgment regarding these things like texts to discern for us whether it is in line with the church's faith. So since Saint Maximus the Confessor's commentaries on the Dionysian writings, these works have enjoyed undisputed authority in the theological tradition of the church. So the church has discerned that these writings are accurate and true to the faith, and has since been invaluable to the faithful in understanding the theology of the church. So we use it to this day to help us to understand what the faith is, what we believe, and to discern what the church fathers believed regarding things like the unknowable nature of God, which we'll discuss tonight. So the writer, he outlines two approaches to theology. These are cataphatic, which is positive theology by affirmations. So this is like attaching characteristics to God, right? So you're saying what God is. So you're attaching concepts to God himself. Whereas apophatic is a negative theology by negations. So in this way, you're talking about God in the way that you are saying what he is not, right? So you're not adding characteristics to him, you are removing things from him so that we can talk. It's almost like talking around God. Because God is unknowable, we have to talk around him. So we are removing characteristics and concepts so that we can understand the unknowable nature of God. This will make more sense as we proceed. So because God is unknowable, the apophatic theology is the only way, right? Apophatic theology is the only way that makes sense for us to use when talking about God, the nature of God. Because he is unknowable, we cannot reach him through knowledge. So the cataphatic method is not appropriate, because if you can ascribe a concept to God, the fact that you're ascribing the concept shows that it cannot be correct, because God is unknowable. So when you're trying to attach a characteristic to him, that is evidence that it is not accurate. You have to remove things from him to understand him in this way. This is a bit of a tricky concept, but it will make sense, I hope. So God is beyond all that exists. So to approach him, we must deny all that is inferior to him, all that is. So creation, right, does not exist in the same way that God exists. But God is beyond creation, but he's outside creation. So we cannot use creation to talk about him, because he is greater than the things he created. Right? So that is why we use apophatic theology, because we remove created things or created concepts to understand him. Like we're going in the opposite direction. We're not adding things onto him, we're removing things. So it is by the unknowing that one may know him who is above every possible object of knowledge. So these are difficult concepts because we're talking about God who is incomprehensible, but we are trying to use our intellect to talk about him, right? So this is the problem that the apophatic theology addresses, that the church fathers understand that we run into this problem where how do you discuss God who is unknowing, who is unknowable, right? You cannot talk about him with knowledge. We have to talk about him by removing what we think we know about him. Yes, Yuan, go for it.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is that the same for like attributes of the Father as well? Like, is it the same thing basically?
So here we're discussing so this is about the nature of God, right? So
Yeah.
what they're trying to kind of explain is that we cannot categorize God. So we cannot use created categories or concepts and try to place God into those categories.
Yeah, okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. No worries. This is a strange concept for us to kind of wrestle with. Okay. So this will help to make more sense of it. So he uses Moses on Mount Sinai as a symbol of this process of knowing God through unknowing. Okay. So proceeding by negations, one ascends from inferior degrees of being to the highest degrees of being, by progressively setting aside all that can be known in order to draw near to the unknown in the darkness of absolute ignorance. That is a lot to take in. But this is just explaining again that the ascent is moving towards a higher degree of being, right? That which is closer to God operates at a higher degree of being. So if you can think about it in terms of those of us who were at the symbolism lessons, if you think about at the bottom is multiplicity, right? So the particulars are in the multiplicity at the bottom. That's the inferior degree of being. Is all the like particular things in creation is at the bottom. As you move up, you start moving towards unity, right? At the top is unity, at the bottom is multiplicity. So God is at the top, right? Heaven is at the top, earth is at the bottom. So as we move up, we discard all the particulars to move into a unity. So at the little bit higher than the particular would be a category for created things. So let's say, instead of talking about a particular car, we have the category of car as a whole. So it unifies all of the cars, right? And then you move up and up and up towards more and more unity. And at the top is God. So at the top, we've let go of all particularities and we've moved into the unity. So this is the idea of moving beyond what is knowledge towards that which cannot be known, which is not in the particular, but in the unity. So light renders the darkness invisible. Okay, so as we spoke about in symbolism, is that light is not just photons. When we talk about light, we also talk about meaning, because we interact with the world through what we can see through our senses, right? We experience knowledge by seeing the world and interpreting meaning. So where there is light, the darkness is invisible. And so knowledge of created things destroys the ignorance, which is the only way by which one can attain to God in himself. So it is in unknowing that we move closer to God. It is not through the knowledge, right? Because it's in the divine darkness is where God is. But the light is the meaning and the knowledge, the understanding that we can, through our intellect, can decipher and understand. But that light hides the darkness, right? The light makes the darkness invisible. So when we look into the knowledge, we cannot see God because we are being stopped by the focus is on the knowledge, on the created world, right? It is not on the uncreated, which is God. He is uncreated, he is beyond the created that we look into. So we're kind of stuck there when we only focus on the knowledge itself. Okay, so that's something we have to move beyond. So Dionysius compares this ascent, during which we are gradually delivered from the shackles of all that can be known, to that of Moses on Mount Sinai. So the knowledge of the created world, everything we know, will blind us from the union with God when we do not move beyond it. So the movement up the mountain is us in humility acknowledging that we cannot know what is unknowable. Right? With our intellect, we cannot understand the uncreated essence of God. And in that humility, we are moved closer to God by accepting the ignorance, by accepting that we cannot know, which is unknowable. When we are stuck in the mode of pride, in that we want to know everything intellectually, we do not move up the mountain. We are stuck in the created, in that which is knowable. We are stuck in the intellect. It's a spiritual problem. This is why atheism is a spiritual problem, because we are stuck in the knowable creation. We do not accept that we have to let go of our pride and in humility move into what is unknowable. So at the top of Mount Sinai, Moses is freed from the things that see and are seen, like all created things, passing into the truly mystical darkness of ignorance, shutting his eyes to all scientific apprehensions, reaching what is entirely untouched and unseen. He is united to the best of his powers with the unknowing quiescence of all knowledge, and by that very unknowing, he knows what surpasses understanding. So that quiescence, that's the inactivity, right, of knowledge, is where knowledge stops. You cannot pierce that veil with your intellectual power. There's a limitation on our ability to understand things with our intellect. Right? God has limited us as human beings to only understand the created world. To move beyond that understanding, we need humility to move into something that we do not understand. And it is in that unknowing, that ignorance, that we start to move closer to God and understand God. It is no more a question of knowledge, but of union. Right? Moses cannot think his way up the mountain. He needs to walk. Okay, this is very important to understand, because we always try. This is a prideful thing that we always try to do. That we try to answer everything with our intellect, because we start believing that that's the only thing that leads us to truth. So we can go and sit and read the Bible over and over, right? But you can't Bible study your way towards God. You have to participate bodily in the mysteries of the church. So you cannot sit and just study the knowledge that's in the Bible. You have to be baptized into the church. You have to participate in the Eucharist. Things that do not require knowledge, but moves you closer to union with God in the fact that you do not understand it. The fact that you cannot fully understand the mysteries is part of why it moves you closer to God, because there's humility in that experience. And in that experience, you start understanding at a deeper level what it means to participate in those mysteries. But you learn it through the bodily participation, not through acquiring knowledge. Right? It's the wrong tool. So this is just kind of a representation of what we're talking about, a more visual one. So the apophatic abstractions moves us closer towards God, closer towards the superior degrees of being, and the cataphatic moves down towards us. But we will talk about that just now, how God condescends towards us cataphatically. And so he will move towards us, condescend towards us in inferior degrees of being, so that we can experience his energies, right? This is just to show you diagrammatically the movement, right? We try to mount up to him towards union through apophatic theology by realizing what he is not, and he condescends down towards us in theophanies, in manifestations through these energies. So this movement is what is happening when we're talking about these different approaches. We cannot move towards God cataphatically, because we cannot understand him intellectually. That intellectualizing of God moves us away from him, towards inferior degrees of being, because you're moving towards creation again. So the levels of ascent, he talks about apophatic theology in a way that there are levels that people can attain to depending on the person. Like apophatic theology is a way towards mystical union with God, whose nature remains incomprehensible to us. So people will experience that at different levels. Just to remind you of the, again, of the symbology of a lesson where light is meaning. The darkness, so we talk about the divine darkness tonight, that Moses experienced at the top of the mountain. The darkness represents the transcendence of God beyond all meaning and concepts, right? So light is meaning and understanding and knowledge. But God is in the darkness because he is not accessible through intellect. He is beyond the meaning and the concepts. If you stare into the sun, you go blind, right? You don't see, you're just in darkness. And this is the same idea. So therefore the path towards union is a mystical piercing of the veils of incomprehensibility. The path towards union is not one of learning and knowledge. You will not attain union with God by studying the Bible or reading the church fathers. There must be a mystical experience within the body of the church to move you towards God. You cannot do it through knowledge and intellect alone. So in Exodus, these are just some quotes from the story about Mount Sinai. So Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. Now the glory of God descended on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. Then on the 7th day, the Lord called out to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Okay. So there are different levels in theology, and each is appropriate to the differing capacities of the human understandings which reach up to the mysteries of God. This is just saying that we all have different ways of experiencing this, right? We're not all the same. We have different experiences of God and different ways of understanding God. And this is a natural thing. Yes, Basil.
Ephraim, how many days did you say now?
6 days.
Yeah. Okay, so interesting. This is with Moses. This is in reference to Moses now.
Oh yes, sorry, yeah.
Okay. So I mean, but obviously this is now pointing back to Genesis. I
Yes.
suppose is that tied into sort of the days of creation are sort of a manifestation of knowledge, like becoming aware of separations between things, and sort of there's
Oh yeah, I
this
didn't. Yeah.
yeah, and there's also like as the days of creation progress, you getting into more sort of there's greater resolution of what's being created, but also in the context of light as information. It's yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just noticing that.
No, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah. Yeah. So okay, so the levels. Um, so interesting. He mentions so people interact with God at different levels in the story. So he talks about how Moses is told to enter the to enter the cloud, or to go towards God, right? To go right towards him. Whereas Aaron is told to stand nearby, and then people like Nadab and Abihu, he uses them as an example, or for example, would be told to go up, but they have to stand far away, right? These are the sons of Aaron. And then the multitude of the people, like just the normal people, are told not to approach. It is dangerous for them. This is to show that there are levels of experience, and that people have to be humble in their ability to deal with these experiences. And it is not that God is rejecting you, it is that he is protecting you out of love, because he knows that if you're not ready, you can be harmed, or you can die from being overzealous or prideful in your ascent, right? You are called up to the mountain. You do not just approach out of your own kind of zeal, right? This is dangerous. So just again, a call to humility. Okay, so apophaticism and the church fathers. Now, the apophatic theology that we've spoken about as a religious attitude towards the incomprehensibility of God, this is found in most of the church fathers. So they all share, or most of them share this kind of thinking, and you can see this in their writing. So here are just a few examples that he uses in the book. Saint Clement of Alexandria says, "We can attain to God not in that which he is, but in that which he is not." Right? That is the perfect apophatic theology summed up there. That's just like the very succinct example of that. For Saint Gregory of Nyssa, he says every concept relative to God is a simulacrum or imitation, a false likeness or an idol. The concepts we form with our natural understanding and judgment, based on an intelligible representation, create idols of God instead of revealing to us God himself. So when we try to use our intellect to know God, we are trying to contain him into a category that we create, or we are trying to put him in a concept, right? And when you do that, you are literally creating an idol. You are saying God is this thing, instead of acknowledging that he cannot be contained in that thing because he is God. So when we try to contain him in something that is lesser than him, we are creating an idol. We are saying that this thing is God, right? That is idolatry, a form of idolatry. St. Gregory also explains that Moses' ascent on Sinai towards the darkness of incomprehensibility represents the way of contemplation, superior to his first meeting in the burning bush, which is a theophany or a manifestation of God. Instead of seeing God in light, he enters darkness, where there is only the invisible and unknowable. But in this darkness is God. For God makes his dwelling there, where our understanding and our concepts gain no admittance. So contemplation replaces something like speculation. Okay. We are not trying to come up with ideas to categorize God. We are simply contemplating. We are in a deep state of spiritual focus. We're trying to contemplate that which is unknowable to us and allowing that to humble us, right? So when Moses experiences the burning bush, this is what we spoke about before, the cataphatic, which moves down towards us. This is a theophany of God, like a manifestation of God that is intelligible to us, right? Moses experienced it as a burning bush. It's something that he could see and understand, even though it was burning in a miraculous way. It was not a normal fire. It was still something that he could understand with his eyes, like he could tell someone what he saw, right? So that is further down the ladder than the darkness. The darkness is at the top, where it is so close to the essence of God that it becomes unintelligible. Like you cannot describe it to someone. It is simply unknowable, right? So it is further up that ladder of theophanies. And we can experience God's energies on different levels. You know, it's like an act of kindness. When someone is synergistically cooperating with the will of God in showing a stranger kindness, right? That is like that's like a small theophany. That's like a small manifestation of God's love for us that you're participating in. So that is a way to understand God through his energies, right? So the burning bush is like is a theophany that's much closer to God himself. It's far further up the ladder of experience. But there are levels of experiences that can move us closer to God and help us understand him. And in that way, he's condescending towards us, right? That is when we experience him in creation. That is God condescending to us so that he can let us experience his love, for example, in creation itself. So as we are filled with an ever-increasing desire, the soul grows without ceasing, this desire to be in union with God. The soul, we are filled with an ever-increasing desire. The soul goes forth from itself, reaches out beyond itself, and in so doing is filled with yet greater longing. So the ascent towards God becomes infinite and the desire insatiable. So as we move closer to God in this mystical ascent, we long for him more and more. As we experience more of him, we want to have even more. So that's why it becomes an infinite movement towards union with God. Okay. So speculation becoming contemplation. No one knows, no one who does not follow the path of union with God can be a theologian. The way of the knowledge of God is necessarily the way of deification. This is something that is very relevant to everyone, in that, as I've said, we cannot. People think that they can become theologians and, like, you can read every book. You can read every book, you can become very knowledgeable, and you can start thinking about how wise you are in the way of God and all these things. But if you never go to church, if you do not enter the church, if you don't participate in the church, you are not going to gain actual understanding. Like, you're not going to gain actual knowledge of God, because it's in the deification, in the mystical ascent, that the truth is revealed. So think about, so Moses goes up the mountain, right? This is a mystical ascent where basically his ignorance grows. He understands less and less as he moves into the darkness. And what does he receive from God? He receives the tablets, the knowledge, right? He receives the commandments. So after his mystical ascent, then the knowledge is revealed. Okay? So God calls him towards this mystical ascent so that he can, it's almost like a test for Moses. Like if he can move that far and he can be that close to God, then he is worthy of the wisdom that God gives to him. So when we don't move God and we think we can go just by a pure strength of intellect and understand God, that is prideful. Like we cannot do that. The process of becoming wise in the ways of God is the actual process of deification. It's inseparable. That's why we said last time that theology and mysticism is inseparable in the Orthodox Church. It goes hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. So apophaticism is a sure sign of an attitude of mind conformed to truth. In this sense, all true theology is apophatic. So most of the church fathers, they will have this approach because it is the only true way of talking about God. Because as we've said, we cannot put God into these categories or concepts because that is just, it's a contradiction. You cannot put the unknowable in a concept that you know. It doesn't make sense, right? So apophaticism is an ascent towards union with God, whereas cataphaticism is God coming down towards us on a ladder of theophanies of God in creation. So as I said on the previous slide, we experience the energies of God on this ladder of theophanies, these different levels of God acting in the world. And this is God condescending towards us, right? This is not us figuring out with our brain power like what God is like. This is God giving us this experience. This is not coming from our intellectual power or whatever. So God condescends towards us in the energies in which he is manifested. We mount towards him in the unions in which he remains incomprehensible by nature. So this is the ascent up the mountain. The God comes down to meet us where we are, and we try to ascend in humility. Right. Speculation gradually gives way to contemplation. So this is knowledge giving way to experience. For in casting off the concepts which shackle the spirit, the apophatic disposition reveals boundless horizons of contemplation at each step of positive theology. So this goes way beyond just, it's much more rich and beautiful to get to know God when we do it in a balanced way where we are both participating mystically as well as learning the theology. These go hand in hand. Then there is an infinite contemplation on the beauty of God's creation, about the love God has for us, all these things. We are shackled when we only look at the knowledge itself. Right? When we're only stuck in the books, it shackles us. You cannot have that a deeper experience of God, that experience of his unknowable nature. You cannot have that when you're just stuck in the books. You have to have the physical interaction in the mysteries of the church to move towards this union with God. So all analogy, it's difficult to talk about these things, obviously. So analogies are usually, they break down at some point, but sometimes they're useful. So if you imagine that you're in a glass structure, like a greenhouse, right? And this structure is filled with things, like created things, just filled with junk and every kind of thing that's all created things are in this greenhouse. So you cannot actually see where the greenhouse stops. All you see around you is all these things, let's say boxes of things, right? So you do not even know that there is something beyond the boxes, right? You don't even know that there's an edge or a structure. You just see the boxes. So what we do in apophatic theology is we start moving the boxes away, right? We're getting rid of the boxes, all the knowledge, right? The things that we can know. We get rid of those things when we move mystically towards God. So when we are participating in the mysteries of the church, we are not focusing on the theology all the time. We're not like trying to study, like, what does this thing and that thing mean and this and that. We're trying to move in a humble way, in a way where we accept the unknowable nature of some things. This is the process of moving those boxes out of the way. And as we move those things out of the way, we start seeing that there is an edge to our understanding. We start seeing the glass casing that everything is inside. And outside of the greenhouse is God. Like, we are limited in the created world within this structure, and we are blinded by the knowledge that we accrue. So the more knowledge we accrue, the more difficult it is for us to see God, because we are just blinded by all of this knowledge that we've accumulated. So we need to let go of that at some point and allow ourselves to be humble in the presence of that which can be humble in the presence of that which we cannot comprehend, right? Then we will start seeing through the glass, seeing through where God actually is. And the only way for us to move beyond that glass is through these mystical experiences. These experiences that we do not study in a textbook, but we go and we bodily participate in it. In the participation, we gain knowledge of God through the nous, through the heart, through the soul itself, not through the intellect. So there's a place where we have to start letting go of this prideful wanting to understand everything with our intellectual prowess. There's a limitation which you cannot move beyond. So with Moses on Mount Sinai, right, to see beyond a cloud, we must move into it. But it's a mystical participation. Speculating with our intellect about what is beyond the cloud will never lead us to the fullness of the truth. Because the rational mind deals in knowledge. It deals in the light of meaning, not in that which transcends all knowledge, the divine darkness and unknowing. But we cannot sit in our Bible study group and discuss the scriptures. We can do that if we do that every day and we know everything back to front. It will move us no closer to God. You will still be stuck in the same place in 10 years. Because the rational mind cannot move in that direction. It is not made for that. We need to move into the cloud. We need to move into the unknown so that God can reveal to us mystically who He is. Right? Apophaticism forbids us to follow natural ways of thought and to form concepts which would usurp the place of spiritual realities. So when we do not participate in those mysteries, and we instead try to talk about them from the outside, we see this a lot, right? If you're on YouTube or whatever, people have debates and whatever. People talk about the mysteries of the church, but they're not in the church. They're talking about spiritual realities and trying to put them into these categories that they come up with. You cannot do that. It doesn't work. Like you're trying once again to confine something that cannot be confined. Right? Christianity is not a philosophical school for speculating about abstract concepts. It is essentially a communion with the living God. It is not a study group. It is not, we're not going to university to become a Christian. Right? There are things that we try to understand, but we have to, there's a point where it does not work anymore. Yes, Rob.
Apologies for interrupting. Sorry,
No worries.
newbie. So in effect, if I were to say, you would say speculation is one being uncomfortable and trying to make yourself comfortable with the idea of God, yet contemplation is where you've released yourself from this what would we call it, uncomfortability, and come to terms with the fact that you can't actually be capable of fully understanding him. Therefore, one must be uncomfortable and contemplate that which you cannot fully ever understand. Sorry, my brain is a bit circular when it comes to reasoning, but that's,
No,
I think.
yeah. No, that makes sense. So I think that is, it's about that being humble in that position of accept, like Father Nicholas always says, humility is accepting the truth, right, of our position in relation to God. And that in the contemplation, what you're doing is that you're simply, you're standing before God and admitting that I don't understand and I don't have the capacity to climb up towards you with my own strength. So I'm going to be here and submit to your will so that you reveal to me what I need to experience. So because God in his wisdom will reveal to us what we need for our salvation. So that is what a very freeing thing, like they previously said about Moses being freed at the top of Mount Sinai, is that we realize that we don't need to carry that weight of trying to figure out everything about God. He will come down towards us when we approach him in humility. So the contemplation is us realizing all of our speculation about God is in the end pointless, because it is God who reveals himself to us when we approach him with humility. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. So theology is never an abstract working through of the concepts. It is contemplatively raising the mind to those realities which pass all understanding, and in this way moving on the infinite path towards union with God. So we're not trying to pull God down. We're allowing contemplation, within contemplation, we're allowing God to pull us up. He's lifting us up to higher realities. We are not, through our power of intellect, pulling those realities down towards our level. So St. John Damascene of Damascus says, all that is comprehensible about God is his infinity and incomprehensibility. So the two things that we cannot understand, those are the things that are comprehensible, right? So the divine essence is the Holy of Holies, which remains hidden even from the seraphim. So even the highest ranking order of angels do not have access to the divine essence. It will always be unknowable. So by attempting to place a concept around a spiritual reality, to contain it, like we said in the first paragraph about usurping the place of spiritual realities, we transform it into something lesser, a lower reality or an idol. Right? This can lead to materialism, to lower forms of reality that's further away from God. So instead of ascending the ladder mystically in humility, we attempt to pull the spiritual reality down to our level in pride. Yeah, there was just one more example I wanted to bring up, which is that in experiences, that example of an act of kindness with a stranger, right? So if we think about cataphaticism, the affirmations, right, to describe the experience. So with our intellect, we've come up with, for example, psychology, psychiatry. Okay. So we have an experience with a stranger who shows us kindness. Now we have some vocabulary, some concepts to describe that experience through the knowledge of psychiatry, let's say. Even if we are the most knowledgeable in those what's the word? If we are the most knowledgeable psychiatrist, let's say, there will always be aspects of these experiences that we cannot quite put our finger on, right? There's always something that is just a little bit beyond what we can describe with our words, with our concepts. Our concepts always fall short of grasping every aspect of every experience. Because the psychiatry, for example, relative to God, it is a blunt tool. It is not something that can carve out the experience and dissect it fully, right? It can only understand bits and pieces of it. There's always an unknowable aspect to these experiences. So it is in those bits that you cannot understand, that is where we start knowing God, right? The unknowable aspects of that experience is where God is hidden. That is just an analogy to kind of get us to understand we have these experiences all the time where we cannot quite grasp the full experience with concepts, with our own intellect. And it's in those unknowable parts, or just beyond the known, right? Just beyond that boundary where God is, that His unknowable essence is hidden right there. We cannot quite reach it. We are always pressing up right against the edges of our understanding. And it's on that border where the mystical experiences allow us to step into that unknown. And even though we cannot describe to someone what it's like, it doesn't make it not real. These are real experiences, but we cannot put them into language, into words. So that is why we always talk about the people who haven't been to the church, or you get excited when you're new, like you want to tell everyone about the church and to experience it and so on. You can't really explain to them why it's such a powerful experience. You just tell them, no, you have to just experience it for yourself. Because there are unknown aspects which are just, they will teach you about the faith in ways that you will understand them by physically participating, and you will get the feeling of understanding even though you cannot explain what you understand, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so that's all I have for tonight. I hope that makes sense. It is quite a tricky subject to talk about. Perhaps Father has something to add here.
Does anyone have any questions, maybe? I can maybe add some comments. So thank you, Ephraim. This is a great topic. In fact, it's there's a reason why Lasky puts this early on in his book, is because this is fundamental to the Christian view and experience of God, is that we have to first understand that our life with God, our experience of God, has to be one where we know the limitations of our our capacity in which we can understand and experience God. I will add a few comments. So, okay, let's first look at like the modern concept about religion and about belief in God, right? So, usually people believe something's true when they can conceive it and compartmentalize it in their own reality, right? So that is, we have made ourselves the standard of truth. And it's quite silly, actually. You know, we always think of modern man as kind of like reached a certain height of, you know, intellectual ability and things. But on the other hand, we've kind of lowered our, we only believe things are true when we can conceive them, at least to our mind, in a rational, understandable way. And this is what now has led to atheism, right? Is that people say, well, I can't quite get it. I can't quite understand God. Why can't I see God? Or why can't I encapsulate him? Therefore, he must not be real because I can't fit him in my head. But the ancient man and the Orthodox Christian would say, well, that's exactly the reason why he's God. God is God because we cannot conceive. He cannot be contained. He's the uncontainable one. And so absolutely right and absolutely true that the church fathers definitely understood apophatic theology as moving higher towards the truth, right? Towards that God is totally unknowable. I wouldn't give cataphatic, so this kind of affirmative expressions about God. I wouldn't say that it doesn't exist. It does definitely exist in Orthodox theology, I mean, as you said, but we have to understand its limitations. So when we say like God is good or God is love, these are positive affirmations that are acceptable. I mean, we say this in our worship, you know, for you're a good God who loves mankind, for you are merciful. So we use these words, but God is that, but he's also not that, as in he's above it. He's above the human concept of love, much farther greater. He's above love, but that attribute bears a mark on the truth of the truth, right? While we can also say things like, you know, there's certain things that aren't associated with God's attributes, like, you know, it's tricky because God is also unjust, because God is merciful, so he's not just. But maybe something like God is not partial, so he's not he doesn't love one more than the other. He loves all equally, right? You can say something like that. So, and I'll give you an example from the Divine Liturgy. So I just brought up this text. This is really actually about how we affirm the unknowability of God. But yes, as I said, you know, we say so many times we have positive statements about God, right? But then when we get to the anaphora, so the anaphora is the part of the Divine Liturgy when we are ascending, kind of like a mountain. It's the lifting up, and so part of it we say this. So this is now after we have said the creed. After we have said the creed, so we've confessed the faith, and we say positive things. I believe in one God. You know, there is one God, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Confess the Trinity. But then after that, then the deacon says, let us stand aright, let us stand in awe, let us be attentive so that we may present the holy offering in peace. So we're now meant to stand in awe as if we ascended the mountain, or we're ascending the mountain. And then the priest gives a blessing and he says, let us lift up our hearts. And it says, we lift them up unto the Lord. So again, this language of being lifted up. And then there's this long prayer. I like to say it in the liturgy, although it's a quiet prayer that the priest says quietly usually. So you'll recognize the words, but I'm going to read it for you because it's exactly what Ephraim's been speaking about tonight. 3 says this: it is proper and right to hymn you, to bless you, to praise you, to give thanks to you, and to worship you in every place of your dominion. So God's dominion is everything, right? Every nation, every corner of the world, it's right and proper for everything, all creation, to worship and glorify God in all of creation. Okay? For you, O God, and now comes the apophatic. For you, O God, are ineffable, inconceivable, invisible, incomprehensible, existing forever, which itself is difficult for us to understand. What does forever mean? It's outside of time. Forever the same, you and your only begotten Son and your Holy Spirit, you brought us out of non-being into being, and when we had fallen away, you raised us up again, and left nothing undone until thou hast led us up to heaven and granted us your kingdom, which is to come. The language there is very interesting. So it says here, you left nothing undone, so you completed all things for the salvation of man, until you had led us up to heaven and granted us your kingdom, which is to come. So there's a alpha and omega here. There's a before and after. It's already, so especially that phrase, you have granted us your kingdom. So you have given us your kingdom, which is to come. So it's both been given, but it's also to be experienced. So that shows how we are we are within time, experiencing the salvation that God has already completed perfectly, and yet we are still moving towards it, right? Experiencing it, but also moving to a greater experience of it. So this prayer is really amazing. And then it's, what is the rightful thing? Experience is thanksgiving. And if you read the Greek, it's always this "Eucharistisomen." We give thanks to these Eucharistic, the Eucharistic words. It says, for all these things we give thanks unto you, to your begotten Son, your Holy Spirit, for all we know and do not know, for blessings manifest and hidden that have been bestowed upon us. So this has to do with maybe the practical side of apophatic theology, which is now in our life experience, is that in the liturgy is teaching us to give thanks for the things we know and the things we don't know, because obviously there's so much we don't understand about our own life, about the universe, about creation, about our neighbors, what other people's experiences, and all these things. We give thanks for all of that, and for the blessings that we can see, and for the blessings that are hidden, it says. And this is a very, I recognize that there are many.
Father, are we losing you? It looks like it's breaking up.
If I don't know, get into a car crash, the right response. Sorry?
No, you're
Yes?
just breaking up your connection.
So I didn't hear the comment. Oh, sorry. So it's probably my kids watching too many cars. Maybe that's a bit better.
Seems to be okay.
Is that okay? Okay, I'll maybe my video. But so again, like this prayer is all about standing before the unknowable God and giving thanks for the things that we know and we do not know. So it's holding these two things together. So absolutely, we have to be okay, and it's actually a wonderful unburdening, like becoming free when we understand and we just recognize the truth, which is that we cannot know God in his essence, but we can know what he reveals himself to us, and he gives that to us. So it's this kind of like it's, in the world we have anxiety. Can you still hear me, Ephraim?
Yes,
Yeah.
you're okay now.
I see some notes saying videos paused. that we try to get manufacture an experience of God.
No, we're losing. We lost you again.
It's something that's revealed to us according to our capacity, right? Which is why Peter. Okay, sorry. Maybe it's a sign we're open for some questions. I think it's my particular connection.
Yeah, probably. Johan?
I just found it's more a statement than anything. At first, the book kind of sounded like philosophical, but if I listen to it, it's actually anti-philosophical. If you know what I mean. So, yeah, it's actually refreshing, because as an atheist, that's the only crutch I had before, you know. So I'm a bit, I have a kind of a distaste these days for philosophy and that type of thing. So
that's what I experienced as well, because I was an atheist for many years, and the way I experienced it was like it was a massive weight being lifted, because I always thought I have to figure everything out on my own. Like I have to have like answers for everything and figure out like the best, way to live and all of these things. And then I realized, oh, I don't actually have to do these things. Like I just
it's actually very true. As when I went into orthodoxy, I actually realized that, well, that I kind of started to make gradual peace with it. There is some things I will never know, and it brought a peace on me, actually.
Yes, it's a very good feeling to have that weight lifted.
Any other questions, maybe, before we close? Ephraim, can I give you like a tricky question?
Uh-oh, yes.
So if God is unknowable, what about Jesus? Just gonna play that card.
What about Jesus? I think
I'm just thinking that's probably a question you'd get, like someone would say, well, I know Jesus, and Jesus is God. So what do you mean I haven't seen God or don't know God?
Yeah. Well, the incarnation is the condescension of God, right? So it's God willingly limiting himself to a person, a human being. So we get to know Christ the person, and he shares the nature of the essence of God the Father, but he's limited to his humanity. So we get to know God as a limited human being in time and space. So it will not reveal the fullness of his essence, but we can learn about him through his actions.
Great, thank you. You stumped the Protestant, I think. Me laughing.
Checkmate, atheist.
The atheist. Sorry, the atheist. Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, Jesus himself says no. He speaks about no one knows the Father except the Son. So he's even speaking about how in his divine nature he knows the Father, but no one else does. Only through the Son, through God's lowering of himself, the economia of God, the condescension. So God, it's like. Because God is incomprehensible, God had to make himself comprehensible to man, and so he becomes a man, right? To share in the experience so that we can come to know God through His Son incarnate, right? Absolutely. So this is an amazing thing. So we must always remember that these two things are brought together. That God reveals Himself to us, and He reveals Himself in the most perfect way through His incarnation. But He still remains, even after His incarnation, His essence remains beyond humanity, beyond all creation, as you say, even the highest of created beings, like as in angels and seraphim and that are surrounding the throne of God, even they do not know the essence of God. So it's this amazing, and the one leads to the other. See, that's the Christian experience, is that the more a person knows Christ, the more they see His divinity, and the more they see his transcendence, and that's the amazing thing. And yet you can even, and yet we also know and experience his humanity, His human nature that is connected to His divine nature. So through His person. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you, Ephraim. What's our next chapter? I think you're going to take a break next 2 weeks, but we'll continue with John's Gospel. But what we're going to look at next time?
Yeah, so the next chapter is God in Trinity.
Okay, perfect. Flows nicely. Okay, thank you, Ephraim. God bless everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Thank
Ephraim.
you.
Thank you,
Good
Father.
night, everyone.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ephraim.